Welcome, history explorers, to Crimson Chronicles. We're often enchanted by the image of kings and queens we see in movies. Splendid, powerful, and seemingly perfect. But have you ever stopped to wonder, what was the stark reality behind that facade? Did life in those magnificent palaces really smell of roses and fine perfume? Now, before we travel back in time, make sure you're part of the Crimson Chronicles community by hitting that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from in the world. It's incredible that we can explore history together from all over the globe. Let's get started. Part 1. The Shattering of a Candlelit Dream. Imagine stepping through gilded doors, your feet gracing marble floors that gleam like mirrors, reflecting the dancing flames of 1,000 candles. The air hums with the whisper of silk and brocade, the murmur of power, and the promise of infinite wealth. Ladies of the court drift by like ethereal spirits, their jeweled fingers trailing across surfaces worth more than entire kingdoms. The very atmosphere shimmers with a strange magic, thick with the scent of roses and amber, electric with the charge of absolute power. This, you think, is the fairy tale made real. This is the storybook brought to life. You breathe deeply, ready to fill your lungs with the essence of royal magnificence. And then it hits you. Not the pure fragrance you expected. It is something else entirely. A cloying, sweet perfume, so potent it suffocates, desperately trying to mask something far more human. Your eyes begin to water slightly as the grim reality behind the fantasy seeps into your consciousness like poison through fine silk. Welcome to the authentic royal court. This is not the sanitized fairy tale of Disney or the romanticized period drama. This is the unvarnished world of medieval and Renaissance royalty, where beneath the jeweled crowns and magnificent robes lurked hygiene practices that would make a modern person double over in revulsion. The woman approaching you, draped in layers of golden brocade, her sleeves dripping with pearls the size of robin's eggs, may rule an empire that spans continents, but she is not properly bathed in months. The gentleman bowing before her with such exquisite courtly grace, the man who controls the fate of nations and commands armies that could level cities, carries on his unwashed body enough lice to populate a small village. That lady in waiting, averting her eyes so demurely, is in fact trying not to breathe through her nose, because the queen's breath could fell a horse at 20 paces. Welcome to a world where power was absolute but soap was optional, where divine right meant never having to say you're sorry for your body odor, and where the phrase cleanliness is next to godliness was considered not just wrong but dangerously heretical. You have just stepped into a world where the most powerful women on earth lived in conditions of personal filth that would horrify a modern homeless shelter, where beauty routines literally poisoned the beautiful, and where the pursuit of royal elegance created walking monuments to human suffering that stagger the imagination. Part 2. The Royal Body. A prison of misery. For a monarch, the body was more than mere flesh and bone. It was the vessel of the state, the ship chosen by God to carry the destiny of a nation. But paradoxically, this sacred vessel was often a battlefield of decay, a prison of misery that no palace wall could conceal. 1. The bathing ritual, the heresy of water. Let us travel back to 1580 to the Greenwich Palace of Queen Elizabeth I. The most dreaded assignment in all of England was not marching into battle, but preparing Her Majesty's monthly bath. Yes, monthly. The most powerful woman in the known world, with coffers that could buy nations, bathed with extreme caution. Even this frequency was considered dangerously excessive by the medical experts of her time. Medical theory, heavily influenced by the ancient Greek doctrine of the four humors, posited that water was a dangerous agent. Submersion, especially in hot water, was believed to open the pores, creating wide gateways for bad air and disease to invade the body and upset the sacred balance of the humors. Bathing was therefore not an act of hygiene, but a gamble with death. Elizabeth's bathing ritual was an elaborate performance. 20 servants hauled bucket after bucket of water from the kitchens, where fires had burned since midnight to heat it. The wooden tub, which looked more like a medieval torture device than an item of leisure, was lined with the finest linen to prevent splinters from piercing the royal flesh. The water was infused with herbs and flowers, not to cleanse, but to overpower other odors and leave a pleasant scent on the skin. But the true horror began when the queen stepped into the tub. Elizabeth, like countless other nobles, used Venetian ceruse, a lead-based skin whitener, daily. She did not wash off the old layer before applying the new one. Her face was a patchwork of cracked, flaking white paint, built up into geological strata of vanity and poison. As she submerged herself, the water immediately turned a murky gray as months of accumulated cosmetics, sweat, and grime dissolved. The lead-based makeup peeled off in sheets like paint flaking from an old wall. The smell rising from that tub was an all-out olfactory assault. The acrid metallic tang of lead, mixed with the vinegar base of the cosmetics, layered over months-old human secretions. All of it warmed by the water to create an odor that could drop a grown man to his knees. And you, as a servant, had to stand in attendance, your stomach churning and your eyes watering, watching dead skin slough off in gray flakes, mixed with white lead residue and brown stains of grime. This was not a bath. It was a horrifying exorcism of filth. 2. The death mask, beauty purchased with life Venetian ceruse, was not a cosmetic. It was a slow-motion death sentence. The deceptively simple mixture of white lead ground into powder mixed with vinegar and water transformed the most powerful women in Europe into walking zombies, their minds increasingly addled as their beauty routine literally killed them from the outside in. The tragedy lay in the accumulation. Each morning, a fresh layer of poison was painted over the old. The mask grew thicker by the day, sometimes becoming so heavy it caused neck strain and headaches. The lead seeped through the skin, day after day, inflicting devastating consequences. Psychologically, lead poisoning causes paranoia, memory loss, and sudden fits of rage. Courtiers noted Queen Elizabeth's increasingly volatile temper, but they attributed it to the pressures of rule, never realizing their queen was poisoning herself for the sake of pale perfection. Physically, it created a vicious cycle of horror. The lead caused hair loss, requiring increasingly elaborate wigs, which only worsened the condition of the scalp. It caused the skin to gray and pucker, demanding thicker applications of ceruse to hide the damage. Most grotesquely, it rotted the teeth and caused breath so foul that courtiers had to learn to stand at a specific distance during audiences, close enough to hear a command, but far enough to avoid gagging. This was not mere vanity. It was an addiction. The lead provided a temporary sense of perfection, a ghostly beauty that symbolized divine purity. But like any addiction, tolerance built up. What began as a light dusting became a thick mask. The queens became prisoners of their own pursuit of beauty, slowly dying for an impossible standard. The living crown, the horrifying ecosystem in the hair. If the face was a canvas for self-destruction, the hair was a living ecosystem of filth and parasites. The elaborate, towering hairstyles of royal women were not just fashion statements. They were mobile biological disasters. The process began with smearing rancid bear or ox fat onto the hair. This thick, foul-smelling grease acted as a binding agent, holding the hair in place. The hair was then dusted with colored powder, white, pink, or blue, to complete the style. This structure was often left in place for weeks, even a month, because the process was so expensive and labor-intensive. This warm, moist, and nutrient-rich environment was a paradise for parasites. Fleas, lice, ticks, and various insects were drawn to it, not just for a visit, but to establish permanent breeding colonies. A countess's head could be a miniature insect city, a complete food chain with predators, prey, and decomposers. The psychological nightmare was perhaps worse than the physical horror. These women had to maintain perfect composure while their scalps constantly crawled with creatures that were biting, breeding, and dying. They carried elegantly crafted scratching sticks of ivory or silver, decorated with jewels to match their gowns. These were refined tools for a disgusting purpose, to insert into their coiffures to relieve the maddening, incessant itching Imagine trying to conduct a diplomatic treaty while a swarm of parasites was feasting on your scalp. Part 3. The Palace. A gilded stage for decay. If the royal body was a microcosm of decay, then the palace they inhabited was a macrocosm of rot, a stage where the contrast between appearance and reality was pushed to its absolute limit. Versailles. The gilded cesspit. The Palace of Versailles under the Sun King, Louis XIV, is the ultimate testament to this. It was perhaps the most unsanitary environment in European history, a place so foul it makes modern sewage treatment plants seem like gardens of Eden. Louis XIV had concentrated his entire court, over 10,000 nobles, officials, servants, and soldiers, in a single location. The palace, for all its splendor, was utterly unequipped to handle such a massive population. It had virtually no functional toilets. The result was a sanitary catastrophe. People urinated where they stood. Women would lift their skirts while men would relieve themselves in corners, in fireplaces, and even off the balustrades of the royal chapel. Corridors not only shimmered with candlelight, but also glistened with puddles of urine. Human excrement was thrown from windows into the interior courtyards. A famous anecdote recounts how Queen Marie Antoinette herself was once hit by falling human waste while walking below. The air was thick with the stench of feces and urine, mingling with the odor of thousands of unwashed bodies, rotting food scraps, and the cloying perfumes used to mask it all. Breathing became a conscious act of will. Courtiers developed sophisticated survival skills, learning to identify the least polluted areas, signaling to each other about fresh deposits, and mastering breathing techniques to minimize exposure to the toxic air. Fashion even adapted. The multi-layered gowns of the ladies served in part to hide and absorb urine as they relieved themselves on the spot. Versailles was the perfect paradox, the center of civilization, the pinnacle of refinement, yet it was a colossal gilded cesspit. Perfume. Olfactory warfare. In this fetid atmosphere, perfume was not a luxury accessory. It was a desperate chemical weapon. Court perfumers became strategists in an all-out olfactory war. They did not create subtle fragrances to complement natural beauty. They forged olfactory sledgehammers, designed to bludgeon the sense of smell into submission. Their recipes called for massive quantities of musk, ambergris, and civet, powerfully pungent and long-lasting animal secretions. When applied over unwashed skin, these potent fragrances mixed with sweat and body oils, creating a new, even more nauseating olfactory cocktail. It was a vicious cycle of olfactory assault, where each solution only compounded the problem. Part 4. The Psychology of Power and Filth. How could human beings survive and even normalize such a horrifying reality? The answer lies deep within the twisted psychology of power, religion, and social status. 1. Power from the privy. The paradox of the groom of the stool. At the English court, one of the most coveted and influential positions was not that of a general or a minister, but the groom of the king's close stool. This man's job was to attend to the king's personal toilet needs, to carry the portable toilet, and most importantly, to clean the king afterward. It was the most menial task imaginable, yet it granted a priceless commodity: private, uninterrupted access to the most powerful man in the kingdom. The king often conducted state business while seated on his throne. Treaties were signed, wars declared, and death warrants issued in rooms reeking of royal excrement. The groom became the king's closest confidant, privy to state secrets and personal anxieties. He knew of the king's health before the royal physicians. This intimate knowledge became a form of political currency. He held the king's physical comfort and dignity in his hands. It is the ultimate paradox: supreme power born from the most humbling and odious form of service. The sanctity of filth, when cleanliness is heresy. The aversion to bathing was rooted not only in medicine, but also in religious ideology. In the Spain of Queen Isabella of Castile, cleanliness was associated with Moors and Jews. Bathing, especially in the public hammams of the Muslims, was considered a pagan practice, a form of hedonism and moral decay. After conquering Granada, Isabella and Ferdinand ordered the destruction of the Muslim baths. Bathing was strictly forbidden. Cleanliness became evidence of heresy. The Inquisition would investigate homes suspected of using too much water. Being caught with soap or clean clothes could lead to being burned at the stake. This anti-hygiene ideology transformed filth into a statement of Christian piety. Enduring physical squalor was seen as a way to emulate the suffering of Christ on the cross. Perversely, when Columbus and the conquistadors encountered the daily bathing natives of the Americas, they were horrified and forced these heathens to abandon their blasphemous habits. They exported their own filth and disease in the name of God's purity. 3. The charity of cruelty, the lesson of the milk bath. The complete psychological disconnect between the nobility and the common people is grotesquely illustrated by the story of Countess Platen of Hanover. Suffering from a venereal disease, almost certainly syphilis, that ravaged her body, she would bathe in milk to soothe her painful open sores. Her next action, however, was truly horrifying. After her bath, she would generously donate the milk, now contaminated with her bodily fluids and pathogens, to the poor. In her mind, likely clouded by her illness, she believed she was performing an act of Christian charity. She failed to comprehend that her gift was, in fact, a death sentence disguised as kindness. The story reveals a terrifying truth. In the worldview of the nobility, their comfort superseded the lives of others. The common people did not exist as equals. Their lives and deaths were inconsequential compared to the temporary relief of a countess's pain. Part 5. The Shattered Mirror and the Lessons of History. As we step back from these horrifying glimpses, one undeniable truth emerges. The fairy tale of clean, beautiful royalty is an illusion, constructed by those who never had to live the reality. These were not stories of dirty people in pretty clothes. These were human beings trapped in biological nightmares of their own making, where vanity, tradition, and social pressure combined to create living conditions that would qualify as torture by any modern standard. The queens and noble ladies we have encountered were not monsters. They were victims of systems that valued appearance over health, ceremony over comfort, and status over basic human dignity. They lived their entire lives in a state of physical discomfort that would drive modern people to madness, yet they maintained their composure, ruled nations, and shaped history while their bodies were being devoured by parasites and slowly poisoned by their own beauty routines. The next time you see a royal portrait in a museum or watch a film about a king or queen, remember these forgotten stories. Remember that beneath the crowns and the ceremony, they were, in the end, just people. People trapped by the accident of their birth in a life of unimaginable discomfort, trying to maintain their humanity while their own bodies betrayed them, day after day, year after year, until death finally released them from their gilded prisons of filth. History is not always beautiful, but it is always a profound lesson in what it means to be human.